From Glitch HQ on Riverside Avenue, and for everyone, if they've heard of it, Minneapolis, this is Nice Games Club, the show where nice game devs talk gaming and game development.
I'm Martha McGarry, and I make nice games.
I'm Stephen McGregor, and I make nice games.
And I'm Arthur Croy, I too make nice games.
For this week's episode, our topics are multi-generational game playing and noble failure. And so, if everyone is ready,
let's start. We really kind of tore through that intro, I feel.
Did I rush through it?
We were all just a little higher BPM than usual.
Ooh,
we
BPM.
got lots of energy
Oh, I know
for
a lot
working
about
on our
BPM
games.
now. Yep, BPM. Yeah, Martha, yeah.
So last weekend, or was the weekend before, it was Sunday, and I woke up and I was like, I gotta get stuff done. So I went to the store and got some snacks, and also
I follow you so far.
and also got just one of those, college ruled notebooks that they sell at convenience stores.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm just, one of my problems with starting working on games is like everything's too precious. Like I have all these notebooks, but they're all like super cool. And I'm like, I can't put ideas in here that aren't, going to end up in the final game. That's
worthy of the bounding.
Yes. Right? So I just got a crappy notebook and I just started writing. And all day I just wrote about the games, ideas that I have in my head, and like ideas that I have about mechanics and everything into this notebook. And it's divided into 3 sections. So I had 3 different, like my 3 main games ideas that I want to work on. Mm-hmm. And then also going backwards, just games that I have in my head and need to have a place to be so that they're not in my head anymore.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that's what I have done. That's my update to all you listeners. Martha's actually doing game dev for once.
Well, that's very exciting.
Yeah. Well, it's an active commitment, right?
Yes.
So what's the next step?
Well, I have to pick one to work on.
Yeah, that's no fun at all.
Or maybe just keep working on them simultaneously. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But getting some mechanics down, or at least a story for the point and click, because that's not really like, I have visions of what each room would look like, but not necessarily how they all would connect together, and doing the what's it called? The puzzle dependency chart. That's called. So got to do a puzzle dependency chart. That's my next step.
Mm-hmm. Sweet.
So that is the gaming update, game dev update.
Yeah. So from where we're sitting at the recording, Ludum Dare 45 just started.
It did. See, every time I don't find out about it till the last minute.
Well, it's way too late for listeners now. But Martha, have you thought of using a game jam to kickstart one of your bigger ideas? Or does that feel more like the place for small little ideas that sort of you want done and dusted?
I don't know about game jams, how I feel about them anymore. We should do another topic on them.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I feel like, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say.
We'll revisit this in the future.
Yes. So maybe. We'll see. I don't know. I'm thinking more, that seems like a lot of pressure, and I don't like working that way anymore.
Yeah, sure.
Like wrecking my sleep schedule to do a thing. But, we'll see.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, you'll keep us updated, I imagine.
Yes. Oh, I'll be giving regular updates, I guess, is the plan.
Yes.
You sound really excited about
that. I just hope I can live up to the deadlines I've put on myself. To stay accountable to you listeners. Speaking of listeners, one of our listeners posted on our Facebook page, because I had been talking about wanting a game about sorting things and putting things away in a house.
Yeah.
And there is a game that's kind of like that's going to be coming out that they mentioned that I should check out. It's called Unpacking. And I don't think it's out yet, but it looks really cool and kind of up my alley. So thank you for posting about that.
Ooh, cool. That's cool. All right.
Whoever the listeners. If you want to tell us more about games that we would like.
Just interpret whatever like nonsense intentions you think we have. Scour the internet for games that could maybe satisfy our demands, and then let us know so we don't have to go looking for them ourselves.
Yes. Great.
Smart lazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like my entire family. Speaking of my entire family.
Oh, yeah?
I wanted to talk about multi-generational game playing. That's my topic today.
Yes, and what does that mean?
This is a term you've come up with to describe this topic, right?
Yes. So I wanted to talk about in the summer, every summer, my whole extended family has a reunion every year. And it's a week long up north. And it's like the best vacation ever because there's nothing planned. Like we don't plan anything. We're just going to go up there and hang out and do whatever. And one of the things I've been doing is now that the places we stay have been updated enough to have TVs and stuff in the cabins. I bring my Switch along, and my little cousins who don't have much video game stuff at their house get to play video games with me, and it's super, super fun. And also my grandparents are there, and we play a lot of card games and board games all together too. And it was like this past year, it struck me so much like, oh, I'm playing games with my a family across different generations, and I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
How it kind of changes how you think about games. Because when you play with people all your own age, you all kind of have similar ways of looking at things.
Sure.
And it was so interesting to think there were parts of, we play Mario Odyssey with my little cousins a lot. They really like playing, and the things that I think would be difficult that I think are difficult are not necessarily the things that they think are difficult or the things that they're into. Yeah. When I play a game, I like having I want to go through the story and have things to do, but I'm like, oh, I can reset the game for you because I've beaten the game, Mario Odyssey, but they are super not interested in that. They're like, whatever, we just want to go around in the different levels. Yeah. We don't want to have to do a story. Then we wouldn't be able to go to switch around to each planet. Or each area. We want to be able to go to all the levels.
Okay.
And I didn't even think about that. That's not how I would have thought they would have thought they would have wanted their own game to play.
Right. A story of their own, the way you experienced it, because that was your progress, right?
Yes. Yeah. But they're not interested in that at all.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons they aren't is because whenever they get frustrated with a part, they will move to a new area. Oh, we're done, bored with all the things in the lake universe. Let's go to the desert. Or, this puzzle is too hard. Let's go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And when the game is locked off for the story, they can't do that. So
my nephews are like that with Breath of the Wild. I think I may have talked about it on the show before, but I gave them my completed save, and then they really liked playing through it and warping to anywhere in the world. And then when Gavin got his own Switch and Zelda, he was very disappointed. He called me up and he's like, how do I get past this part? And I'm like, I don't know, kid. It's been a long time.
Oh, no.
But it is really interesting because I think younger people, when they play games, it's more about the actual play of it, right? We as adults, we have checklists and we have to-dos and we have objectives, and that's important to us. Otherwise, things feel meaningless and then the existential dread sets in. But when you're a kid and you're playing as Mario, that triple jump, that's it. Yeah. That's all you need.
Oh, man.
Right?
Yeah.
It's okay that everything is already unlocked and everything, all the doors are open. There's no accomplishment necessarily that's important there. It's the sort of just jumping on and off things that's play, right? We do forget that sometimes at our age.
Yeah, I think about that because when I was younger, I played Super Mario 64 all the time.
Yeah.
And I still feel like Super Mario 64 is the most fun 3D Mario platformer that I've played. Even though Odyssey adds some mechanics and stuff that make it really interesting. And I think part of that is just the nostalgia for being a kid and just being able to hop around all over the place.
Right. Can you capture that again when you pick it up once more?
I haven't played it in a bit, so
okay.
Maybe I should just do that and just rip the Band-Aid off.
It would be interesting to see if you go back and play old games the way you used to play them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Or or things just change as you get older and you can't go back.
Yeah. I guess when I was younger too, we used to take games and just make our own game modes out of them. So with Super Smash Brothers, me and my brother, and maybe one or two of our friends, would all pick Link and then go to the Zelda level, and then we just force ourselves to throw bombs at each other all the time.
Yeah,
that was super fun. And then when Melee came out, we would force ourselves to play Pokemon, and we'd only have Pokeballs, and then we'd play Pokemon battles.
That's awesome.
Cool. But like, I don't want to do that now. Like I asked my brother, like, do you want to like, have Pokemon battles like we used to? And I'm like, no, not really. Well, I don't know why that is.
When my dad was little, he and my aunts would go play out in the woods, and there was this one time where they played with this stick, and they still start laughing whenever they start describing this and can't really tell me what they were doing with the stick, but it was very funny and very fun.
Okay.
And they tried to go do that same thing the next day, and it was not funny anymore.
Yeah.
And not fun at all. It was just like a ghost of what they had experienced the day before. It's like a one-time thing.
That's something I recognized when I was a kid, is that like I would like have a huge amount of fun playing one thing in one day, and then the next day we tried it again and it wasn't as fun. And I was like, that must be a rule of the universe. It's not going to be as fun the next day. Yeah.
What you were saying reminds me of when we would play Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, because we would try to do our own game modes in that too. Mostly just silly ones like how many maps can we go backwards on, and just try to like go backwards, or try to like destroy as many other players as like NPC players as possible. Try to find all the like just crazy ways to play.
Yeah. I did that with Mario Kart 64 and other racing games. I felt like I didn't do a lot of racing in the racing games I played when I was a kid.
Like as our generation and adjacent tends to have these examples, right? Of like we played it slightly differently because we ran out of ways to play it the way it was designed, and we still had time on our hands.
Yeah.
But I think now games and as game designers, we think about incorporating that into the design in a lot of examples. Like Fortnite's a good example of just like when players start doing a thing that's a little bit off label, then they just make that official. And I guess we just have more capability as designers to accommodate those impulses than we used to, perhaps.
We also signpost it more too, right? Because we have achievements and stuff, and those are ways to hint players into playing like with alternate ways of playing, like Mirror's Edge and no guns and stuff like that. So
right. And is it the case that gives a lot more flexibility and options for players, or is it the case that like we rob them of some of the discovery or creativity? Yeah,
like it's not their game anymore. It's the game that the recess monitor came up with.
That's part of the reason why I don't like achievements. Like I feel like it takes a little bit of that.
You don't want to be told what to do.
I don't. It's my game. I paid for it. Or my parents paid for it. I'm going to play it how I want to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I remember when I was a kid and I had my cousin over, and sometimes we would play games with her. But a lot of the times, me and my brother just wanted to play the game, and my cousin would just keep nagging us to play it. And so like what we would do is we would give her a controller and it wasn't plugged into anything, and she'd just be mashing buttons.
You monster.
I know.
Wow.
Hey, okay, I was like 10, okay? I know it was really mean. I don't even think she ever recognized it. She was still having a good time.
So whatever it takes to sleep at night.
Yeah, but it was cool because we got to play the game. So that's
and she didn't, and that was the whole point.
Yes. Exactly it.
Well, like, was the reason that you didn't want to play with her because she was not skilled enough to play at your level, or?
Oh, I think part of it was that. Part of it was also like, we were playing on the PlayStation. The PlayStation only had 2 controllers.
Yeah.
So like we felt like we had to play another game, and we were like, no, we're playing Crash Bash today. So you're going to have to take this controller and play this fictional invisible character or whatever we said.
Well, there is definitely that thing of the youngest of a sibling group or whatever will always want to sort of aspire to play the games that their older siblings play.
Yeah.
Right? That's a pretty common thing. And so, but then you have like, a whole family plays Mahjong or Yahtzee or something together.
Yeah.
And those games tend to have a wider age range of people who can play in one match, right?
Yeah.
But then sometimes it's like you're 12 and you don't want to play Candyland anymore, right?
Yeah.
So as designers, how do we think about making things that can work for that, or at least signposting that people who are outside that range, we shouldn't accidentally give them the impression that they want to play? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the hat in Mario Odyssey is pretty interesting. My littlest cousin really likes playing the hat, and she will she'll be like, I'm playing the hat. No one else can play the hat. Why are no? Like that's her thing.
Mm-hmm.
But she'll eventually get bored and wander off, and then the older one will take on both.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is like one of the challenges that I wanted to talk about is like how, I guess it goes back to the accessibility sort of controls schemes that we've talked about before, making things but like the things that they have trouble with sometimes aren't necessarily the things that get controlled by the accessibility controls.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
Or like they're less common. Like they should be able to, we would run into parts where you couldn't advance without beating a boss. And like I had to beat the boss for them because it just took too much timing and coordination. But they were doing just fine with like puzzles and things like that in the game that required the same mechanics, but just slower.
Yeah.
And I guess there are like Celeste does a timing slowdown and things like that. But like just being able to skip that boss battle would have been way easier.
Right.
I mean, maybe not code wise, but
right.
But yeah. No, it would have been easier for as a player to just be able to skip the boss if you don't want to deal with the boss.
Yeah.
It was this in Super Mario Odyssey they had that?
Yeah, they were trying to do. I think maybe that's why we switched back to my save, is because they didn't want like it was too difficult.
Okay.
Nintendo, interestingly, Nintendo does make games that are approachable by a wide variety of players of different ages and skill sets.
Yeah.
But they also generally don't do, except for like a hero mode in a Zelda game, they generally don't do difficulty settings.
Yeah.
So they end up, there's cases they can't cover, right? Because of the way that a lot of their games are set up.
Yeah.
So it's a very laudable achievement that they can have something that works for so many different types of players without having any of those settings exposed.
Well, they don't.
But also, when you do reach the edge of that, it can be especially annoying. Like, why didn't they just give me this option?
Yeah, they don't have the settings, but they do have that. Like, they have not assist mode, but like in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze or whatever, the newest one, where like you could play as Funky Kong if you die too many times.
Oh, right.
Stuff like that. They have those.
And I guess the more recent 2D Marios had that as well.
Yeah, the fancy Cat Mario or whatever it was called. Yeah.
And like the last couple of Kirby's and Yoshi games also had stuff like that. They were a very explicit mode, right?
I should pick up the Kirby game because I think they would really like Kirby too.
Yoshi's Woolly World has a mode that's Yoshi is actually a very hard game. Like Yoshi's Island is really hard, but the newer ones are so cute and fluffy that they're not as hard, but they're still kind of hard. But then they just have a mode which is like you can never fall in a pit, and like that makes the difference, and it doesn't feel any less fun or accessible. But like unlike Celeste, where it's very fine tuned and you do it to make you as the player feel right. This is just like a straight up easy mode.
Yeah.
In that nothing changes except there's just fewer hazards. Like all the spikes are covered and stuff like that. And it's like it's blunt. It's a blunt instrument, but sometimes that's what you want, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say the assist mode for Celeste is really cool because it's really accessible and like you can tune the difficulty the way you want to do it.
Yeah,
but
like that's a hassle sometimes.
Yeah, and it's a lot of menus, right? So like as a kid, are you gonna be looking at all these menus and go, oh, I can mess with all these things and know what they all mean and be able to set it to the difficulty you want? And do you even want to do that? I feel like I wouldn't have the patience to deal with all that stuff.
Well, in Celeste, the reason you have so many options is because then you get it to what you need, but then you can still feel challenged to the way you want to. So the accomplishment makes sense. But if you're 8 years old, like who cares?
Right.
Like, just make all the hazards not kill you, and then you'll have a great time. Like there's no. You don't need to worry about as an adult where you feel like being pandered to or something. That the innocence is lost on you, but
Yeah, exactly it. So like I don't know if that's a solution if you want like kids to play your game. Having Celeste assist mode be that. Open.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a balance.
Yeah, it might be easier to just have it the way Nintendo does it, but then it makes it feel bad. I remember I felt bad like if I were having a hard time with a level and then the thing popped up and said, hey, do you want the easy mode? I'm like, no, I don't want the easy mode. Let me finish this. So like then it makes it frustrating for me. And so it just it's difficult to determine how best to approach that. And I don't think as an industry we've landed on a perfect solution that ticks both the boxes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, as a designer, you have to decide. You can't have it all, so you have to decide like if you're going to have options that widen your audience, then you still do need to make some choices about like the method at which you widen it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you widening it to like players of all skill levels, but people who are familiar with gaming and have played for 20 years? Or are you thinking about expanding your audience to different age groups? Or, it's even more complicated than it appears at first, right?
Yeah.
Then you have the other end of the spectrum, where you're playing with grandparents. And with grandparents, it's harder to get, at least my grandparents, are harder to get them into playing anything on the computer.
Yeah.
Or screen. Some grandparents do, but some grandparents don't.
Sure.
And so we play a lot of card games. Like my grandma and my grandpa used to play cribbage every night. And you couldn't call them between 6 and 7 because they were playing cribbage. That was cribbage time. They wouldn't answer the phone. So, so like one of the card games we play as a big family is called Canfield. And I was looking it up, and actually the word Canfield is what the rest of the world calls the solitaire we play. It's actually Canfield Solitaire. And basically my family's game Canfield is solitaire, but multiplayer solitaire. So you can play on everyone else's cards. And it gets very heated and very tense, and like requires a lot of like yelling and strong-willed, and that my card was on top first, throwing other people's cards off, stuff like that. So you have to be very thick-skinned. You would like it.
My family would love this.
Yeah. It's very up your family's alley, cool. I think. But my grandma loses all the time because she will get stuck like with her cards in front of her and then go, oh, I missed that. Oh no. And get like very flustered.
Yeah.
And so what we've been doing is she also cheats a lot, and we just kind of let her do that. Like she'll only put 10 cards in her Canfield pile, which is the thing you have to get off to win. And she'll play cards on the wrong suit, and we'll just be like, it's fine, it's grandma's thing, just let her do it. And that has made it so that even though she's has less like ability to do the game, that she still feels like she's having fun, and that she's getting one over on us, even though she's not. But
yeah, I mean, house rules, yo.
Yeah, and I think one reason why it's easier to play board games and card games with people of all generations is because you can change the rules on the fly, and there's no like hardware limitations and design limitations on that. Like, like we don't like this mechanic, we'll just throw it out. It's no longer a thing. Oh, that die roll was a 5. Let's just move it up to like a 1. Let's just move it up to a 5. There you go. We're good. Like, let's just skip to the end of the game. Those are things you can do with that. And so like, I guess this is like a lot of hardware limitations on how much we can code that into games, but I think we could get more people on board together if we started thinking of like allowing people to cheat. Like that's okay.
Right.
You used to have cheat codes.
Exactly.
Don't have cheat codes anymore.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I mean, think of like a multiplayer game where you like give everyone like an allotment of mulligans. And maybe you can actually handicap certain players in the settings menu or something. Now, how comfortable are people sort of putting it on record that they're the ones who are worst at it and need the most help? I don't know, but I think of like trivia games. Like my family would play the Nintendo 64 Jeopardy, which was perfect because it was 3 players, and so there was always usually 3 people around. But people can play on teams too, and so and that's just trivia. So and it's multiple choice on a console. So there's really not anyone who can't play that. And so there are some games that are rigid, and in fact, a game like that makes a lot of sense because like Trivial Pursuit is always for some reason people fight over Trivial Pursuit, even though it's a pretty cut and dry what the deal is. But in Jeopardy, you can't really argue. A digital Jeopardy game. Right. But like, what is it? The Jackbox Party Pack has lots of trivia games that are really good for all ages. And they're still modern but they don't require, they're not, they're not video games in a more familiar sense. But they don't have this sort of, the flexibility that you're describing in card games and, with house rules and stuff like that. But it still captures a little bit of that ability for everyone to just dive in regardless.
Yeah, that's true.
Those are built for parties, though, right?
Yes.
I mean, I guess one could argue the Jeopardy game probably wasn't built for parties, but like,
No.
but like it still works in that instance, right?
Yeah.
So like, and Jackbox is definitely built for parties. So like, I guess if you were to build it, you would build it as like a thing that's like doesn't take a lot of commitment, right?
Yeah.
I think that's how a lot of the Jackbox games work. Is that like they don't take a lot of commitment because you only need a phone or a device or something that you can log on to a website with.
It's also really hard to be good at those games.
Yeah.
So there's no motivation to like master it in order to beat everybody because it's just kind of impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. That's totally it.
Even the trivia ones like are kind of hard to win at every time because they tend to either have more randomization mechanics or they tend to have like much wider swath of question types.
Yeah.
So it's harder for anyone to master.
My brother hates all the Jackbox games, which is why I haven't gotten my family on board with playing them because he will always naysay them. But that's because he doesn't like having to come up with something funny on the spot.
Yeah.
It's hard for him to do.
Yeah.
Which I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So pros and cons.
I kind of don't like those games, specifically the ones where you got to come up with something funny on the spot because it's always subjective. And like, if you make something that nobody laughs at, then you just feel bad. Even if nobody knows you put it up there, like it still sucks. I much prefer the trivia ones.
Yeah.
Like that murder party one or whatever. That one's fun.
Yeah. Even though it's creepy and about murder.
Yeah.
Because it's just a trivia game.
Yeah.
For the most part. But I'm with you. I like as much as I sort of praise the Jackbox like style of game, I also hate all of them except for the trivia ones. But like I see people play them and it's like, well, they have value.
Yeah.
You know?
I think part of it is like the social aspect of it. That's why like
their activities more than they are games, really.
And they provide you with an avenue with which to interact with without like having to have a conversation. You're having a conversation about the game, I guess. Like that's how I know this is a controversial opinion, but my family loves Monopoly. Even though it's actually very controversial in our family too. We almost shunned my uncle from the family because of how we were playing the game. We get real hardcore intense when we play games. But like I really like the aspect of Monopoly I only like Monopoly specifically because the way that game works is like it encourages you to do trades. And so you have to like negotiate with your family to do it. And we played it with multi-generations in that like we have like my cousins who are like 8 or 11 or whatever. And then like me and my brother who are in our 20s. And then my dad and my uncle and stuff are in their 40s and 50s. And what we do is we just pair them off with younger generations. And so that like they can together negotiate to figure out what they want to do.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Oftentimes most of the time it's like the older people are doing the negotiations and stuff and doing a lot of the action, but like the younger kids can still feel engaged with the game. But like what I like about that is it invites, well, in our family, it invites a lot of argumentation, which is great. And like I really enjoy that aspect of it because like it's simple enough and random enough where like anybody could be in an advantage position. And then like you just work from there. So I don't know. I like that aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I think that like having it, if you wanted to make a game that was good for both kids and your grandparents, then like maybe making it so that it's accessible for teams and making it so that it just invites, it's simple enough where people can just like interact in a simple way.
Yeah.
Is a good way to go about it.
Well, pairing off a younger and an older member of the family for balance reasons. Yeah. Right? It happens a lot in trivia games with family. I know that my family, they won't let me and my wife play together because we'll dominate. Fair. Right. And so, which is fine. Yeah. Which means whichever team that Dale is on usually wins.
Nice.
But yeah, that's and it's really easy to set up, right? It's like, who would feel bad? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And it also lends a sense to like, you don't have to take the results that seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I mean, your family's a little different, I guess, because you really fight for it. But that's interesting. We've all described our families. We all sort of have very similar experiences, but I'm getting the sense that they're very different, like fly on the wall, like very different things happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Depends on your family. Certainly.
Which means there are probably some universalities, I suppose.
Yeah, but not everything is universal in the way we've been approaching it.
Because when you describe, my family can't play Monopoly because it requires you to be a little serious.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's too boring.
Yeah.
And so we were just really bored.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But we really enjoy code names.
Okay, sure.
Because the results don't matter. And so you can really, really care about this particular guess. Or you don't have to.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really ruin anybody else's fun, right? Whereas if Monopoly, if you're not trying, the person next to you is trying, feels bad because they're wasting their time now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you need to be at each other's throats for it to be fun.
That makes sense. Yeah, and it certainly depends on the group too, because I love the board game Concept. And I used to play that all the time.
Yeah.
But then I brought it home and had my family play it, and they're like, I don't understand how any of this works. Why would you put this cube over here? And I was like, what? But it's a simple game. And I was frustrated. So it totally depends on the crowd you bring it to.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't account for every crowd. But that's a good point. I didn't think about that. Obviously families are different.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you make something that works for the children in your family and the grandparents in your family, how would that work on another person's?
That's
families?
true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of I think the only counterexample I can think of for my family, which is we're much more party game, right? We don't really want to take it seriously. Somebody wants to be able to leave for 5 minutes. We don't always do that, but everyone wants the freedom to do it.
Yeah.
So we can't get too involved. But one exception was Nintendo Land. For Wii U.
Okay.
My family got into that pretty hardcore, and we all tried real hard. And I don't know if that game is just because it is more of a party game, that it was more flexible to that. But we actually were really properly competing with each other in a way that we generally don't when we play games together.
Okay.
And so that's an interesting example. I can't think of anything else that my family, with many generations, has played together that's like that.
Interesting.
I don't know, but are there games that your family?Maybe that's why Concept was hard to do, because you couldn't.
They couldn't take it as seriously. Yeah, they were like, "I want to win," and I was like, "But no.
there's not really competition in that game.
You can have competition. I don't like the game as much that way because then it's not as well. Oh yeah, that is a lot of it. Now that I think about it, the way you were talking about it, because the way Concept works and why I really like it as a party game is that people can go in, make a bunch of guesses, and then leave when that specific guess ends. And oftentimes it takes 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's barely a commitment. My parents, and I think all of my family really wanted to commit to a game. And they wanted to compete over a game.
Yeah.
And so Concept did not bring that to them.
And in Concept, all you can do is add to everyone else's enjoyment. You cannot do anything to subtract from it.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's kind of important for people with different backgrounds and skill sets and intentions, because families have character, right? They're all my family's this way, your family's this way, and so on. But also people within families, don't always jive as well as say maybe our families do with themselves.
Yeah.
Well, depending on what family or what group of people, multi-generational group of people you bring a game to, it will either be a smashing success or a noble failure.
Wow, you threaded the needle on that one. Very good.
Oh boy. Yeah.
This one's my topic, noble failures. I want to talk a little bit about just things in history that we tend to make fun of. What spurred this on is the Ouya, right? You all remember the Ouya.
Yeah.
And it is now it is a punchline, but it is interesting how a lot of these, and Virtual Boy is another example, and I'm going to detail a couple of these specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
But I do think of some of these, and I worry we don't appreciate them enough, either for, there's always the ahead of its time. But I think more than that, it's the idea. It's there's a sort of a purity of thought and a noble intent. Yeah. And then it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I don't really think there's any reason to make fun of that. And I feel that happens a lot with a lot of these things. And, I have my own subjective judgment of what I think meets this qualification.
Right.
But I also, things that don't meet this qualification, there's a bunch of failed consoles in the 90s that all had some pretty good ideas, but the 3DO, for example.
Yeah.
It was fine, but I wouldn't call it a noble failure.
It did its thing.
It just, maybe it could have done better in a different universe, but it was just a video game console.
Yeah.
It did have some unique ideas, but stuff like that. So Steam machines. The idea was to bring Steam into the living room.
Yeah.
But it was also a play, it was competitive against Windows, and it was how do we bully our way into the console market, but also not do any of the R&D? So like, that's not a noble failure. That just was a mistake. Right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. The Vita isn't on this list, is it?
No.
Okay, good. I'd have to argue with that.
The Vita had a proper shelf life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it was played on many a road trip and on many airplanes, and it did okay.
Yeah.
It had its time, and it's gone now. But
you and my brother played it quite a bit. Yeah. Those were the only two people who played it.
So the first one I want to talk about is that I don't know a lot about this, so I found a couple of examples of just things that failed, and just trying to like do some research as to like. Because I'm thinking about some of these things and I'm like, well, I have my experience with a couple of these. So I'm very much informed by my experience.
Sure.
So I wanted to look outside and find some other examples that I wasn't as familiar with to kind of get a broad notion. And the one I found here was really interesting called iRobot, which is named, I imagine, for the Asimov story.
Okay.
But it's an arcade game. And it was one of the first arcade games to have polygon graphics, which was sort of interesting. So innovative in that sense. But I think the real interesting thing about it was it had a second game mode. The game itself was fine, I guess. I couldn't read a lot. I didn't read a lot about what was interesting about it, other than the technically.
Sure.
But it had this second mode, which was called Doodle City. And the idea is that it had this technology to generate these 3D graphics. And so you could just, you put a coin in and you chose the game or Doodle City. And Doodle City was like a 3-minute timer.
Yeah.
And it was not a game. It was just you drew in 3D space using polygons. And this is in 1984.
Oh, wow.
And so the idea is like, imagine in this era when you don't know what's coming next, you don't know what's going to be popular. And it's like, the innovation is kind of like you have to innovate. Like there isn't enough of the same yet, I suppose, for you to just go along with the crowd. And so that's sort of interesting, but also like the noble failureness of it, I think, is because it didn't sell well.
Yeah.
It's notable mainly for its use of 3D graphics early on. But I think this Doodle City thing is what really makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Is this idea of like a new idea and just and think like, well, we've got this tool. What else can we make with it? And I think that is very common in a lot of sort of skunkworks projects where you're trying to come up with something, you've got sort of an idea and it doesn't really work. And then you try something else with the parts you have laying out on the table. And then that's where the interesting thing happens.
Yeah.
And so I think those are noble intents. And that's a really nice example.
That's cool.
So let's talk about the Ouya, because that's the one that inspired this.
Yeah.
2013, for people who don't know the basic details, it was a Kickstarter project, and it was one of the, like a number of, like Pebble Watch is another one, like one that is notable for being incredibly successful on Kickstarter, like breaking records that have been broken since, but so it goes.
Yeah.
So they got some high-end talent to do the industrial design. They got a lot of really interesting people pulled from the tech sector. It was very startup focused. But the idea was it was a micro console. So Android, ran on Android, but plugged into your television, used a gaming controller, and then had its own storefront. And there were two interesting parts about it. One is the hardware. And they wanted, like Android phones, every hardware is a development kit. And so even in that era, like set-top boxes, like consoles obviously have dev kits, right? They're not as easy to develop for. But this still seemed new, even in a world where you had an Android phone or iOS and you could develop on your own. The idea of having something in your living room you could play for console games and it would spur this market and anybody could develop for it was kind of a new and interesting idea. It was taking that notion that had mobile and bringing it into a space where people weren't as familiar with it. So the hardware was interesting. But also the people don't remember this part exactly, but the storefront was designed so that every game had to have a free demo. So that's one of the reasons why it failed, is because people had a hard time developing demos. And of course, research has shown that demos actually don't help sell your game. But the idea was it was going to be consumer friendly. So the hardware and the ecosystem was meant to be developer friendly. And the software or the business model was meant to be consumer friendly. Yeah. If, I buy the Ouya, it was $100, right? And so a cheap way to get into console gaming.
That's consumer.
And then I go to the store and I download 50 games and play all their demos.
Yeah.
And the ones I want to keep playing, I pay for, right?
Yeah.
And it seemed like a really cool democratizing model. So not just for developers, but for players. I intersect with this because the Ouya was the first thing that I developed on that wasn't a mobile phone. So I had done Android development in like the early 2010s. and iOS stuff as well. And I wanted to make some games and apps and stuff for it because that was accessible to me.
Oh yeah, that makes
right?
sense. Yeah.
Even PC development wasn't as accessible to me in those days.
Okay.
And certainly console development impossible. And so the idea of the Ouya was something like, oh, I can make a game with a controller that has joysticks. I can do that.
Yeah.
And that seemed out of reach to me before then.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, not entirely, but it seemed impractical, I suppose, to me before that. So I bought into the idea. And Metro Nexus, a game that's still not done, but that started out as a prototype for Ouya. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I was like, oh, I can finally make something with controllers.
Yeah.
And it was like a big deal. And it was a big deal for a lot of people. Towerfall famously started out on the Ouya, and that company went on to make Celeste and is now forming a new collective studio that will surely, go on. And so, but the Ouya is a big punchline. People make fun of it because it made a lot of bad moves, right?
Yeah.
And one of the worst things they did was they had a fund where they're like, they made so much money off Kickstarter that they're like, we're going to share some of this money with developers. So the idea was that it was called Free the Games Fund, really dumb name. But the idea is that you give some exclusivity to Ouya, and then they help fund your game. Yeah. So you run your own Kickstarter, and then they match you dollar for dollar up to a certain point. That was the idea from this fund they had done. So you just need to. So Kickstarters are famously you can't budget properly for a Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. You get a certain amount of money, but your game's going to cost 2 or 3 times more to make than what you asked for. Yeah. And because gamers they don't know how much games cost. Yeah. So this was designed to make that model more practical for people. But ultimately, Ouya ended up stumbling as a company and wasn't able to pay out all of those rewards. Yeah. And the company got bought up by Razer, and it was just like a whole bunch of drama. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, people had their hearts in the right place, but again, just mistake after mistake. Yeah. And other than Towerfall, not really any commercial successes on the platform. Yeah. And the product did really well on Kickstarter, but then it didn't sell well afterwards. Yeah. Because there wasn't a reason to get it. It was an oversaturated market. Like looking back, there's so many reasons why it failed. Mm-hmm. Like it's not actually that hard it's not even like if it were just a little different, it would have taken off. Like I don't think it really had a shot. Yeah. But it did a couple of things. One is it democratized game development in that era. Mm-hmm. And it also spurred on a bunch of other hardware projects. A lot of them failed as well. Yeah. But it became inspiring for a lot of other interesting projects that did become successful after that. Mm-hmm. And so I find that sort of interesting. So I that's, put that on the wall as a noble failure. Yeah. For sure.
I wonder that like when people make fun of the Ouya, they're not necessarily making fun of all of those good things you brought up. Yeah. They're just making fun of all of the bad decisions that they made.
Well, there tends to be a sort of an implicit statement, which is like, well, they shouldn't have bothered.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I hear that's very common with like a Windows Phone is another example. Like something that like, they just shouldn't have bothered.
I'm on that side.
Right. But there's a lot like hardware. It tends to be, the truth is like not everything succeeds. Yeah. So you hear a lot of people saying like, oh, you know what? It's just Android and iOS. It's a duopoly. It's unfair. It's impossible to enter that market. Mm-hmm. And as soon as someone tries and then fails, it's like, what do they think they were going to do? Compete with those two?
We're seeing the exact same thing with the Epic Store. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah, that is exactly what's happening. Like, there's just Steam, and I guess it's sort of like little tiny fraction. Yeah. Of it. And then like Epic comes in and is trying to, be a competition. Everybody's like, why do you even bother doing this? It's not a good service. I'm just going to stick to Steam, and everybody keeps complaining about it. Yeah. But Epic is still around because they have so much money.
Well, they have the money to eat the losses, right? Yeah. Like they're pouring tons of money to not fail. Right. Yeah. But there's other like Humble they sell games, but they sell Steam keys. Right. Congregate. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people have a down opinion on them because they're the little guy and like, how dare they and why should they even bother? Yeah. And I think, I don't think they're on the way to failure at all, but like, I think that people are ready to dismiss them. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think I don't think there's a solution to that attitude. I think it's going to exist forever, but it's a shame. Yeah.
I mean, that did happen to Discord, right? Like they tried to compete with Steam and stuff, and nobody used any of the games. I guess the way I think it worked is like if you got Discord Nitro, you got access to a bunch of free games. Yeah. Is that how it worked?
I think so.
Okay. And then, but like it seemed like nobody was actually playing the game, so they just ended the service after like a year of it existing. Yeah. So
So I mean, that I don't know if I could put that on the wall of noble failures, but no, it definitely qualifies in this idea of like people now are derisively like, why did they even bother?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well, I don't know, maybe in an alternate universe it would have heralded a new business model.
Mm-hmm. They wanted to try something new. They wanted to try to jump into a new market.
Yeah, and like kudos to them to like putting up some, not just actual like capital, but like its reputation in the space it existed in to risk trying something new.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of credit to be had there, which is why like when you have the big monolith like Steam that sort of moves very slowly, they don't take a ton of risks.
Yeah.
Like it's safe and it's probably correct, like why risk that much? But when someone does, it's cool, right? And I mean, anyway.
That's cool.
Yeah, so the last big one I want to talk about is Rock Band Network.
Okay.
So so I mean, hardware is what we've been talking about mostly to now, but like I think this one is really interesting. Another one that I have a connection with.
Okay.
So Rock Band Network, if you're not familiar, is a platform for you to upload your own music to Rock Band. So it was built off of Microsoft's XNA platform for Xbox 360, which is how a lot of really interesting indie games in the latter part of the 2000s came to consumers.
Okay.
And so it was part of that indie wave. And so, but that was the backbone of it. And so the idea was that you would use these tools that they had built to author your own tracks by bringing in your audio, putting out where the gems go and then uploading it to the system and then selling it for whatever. It failed for a lot of reasons. And when I say failed, it actually ran for a number of years and was well received by consumers.
Yeah.
And it seems like a success. But it was a failure in what it wanted to do, I think.
Okay.
And because I did I did author tracks for this.
Okay. Yeah.
I made no money doing it.
Oh,
but that was the notion. It was meant to have this indie developers be able to sort of I formed a company, an authoring company is what we called ourselves, to author tracks for Rock Band. I would musicians would come to my website, upload their tracks, and then I'd sign a contract with me where we'd split the results 50-50.
Yeah.
So there's two ways you could do it, at least the way we did it in those days.
Yeah.
You could either split or you could charge it as a service. So a band could come to you and said, hey, turn all our songs into Rock Band tracks. And then they'd pay you some money. Okay. And then you'd give them all the files they need to upload it themselves. And then they would get whatever royalties came from sales. But even that was a hard model to do because of the way that they operated the system, where you didn't just make it and upload it.
Yeah.
You had to make it, upload it, and then there was a whole infrastructure of play testing where in order for it to pass through the system, peers on the Rock Band network, other people who were authoring, would have to download and play your demo tracks, demo versions. They'd give you feedback, and it was a really interesting system. Okay. But ultimately, it meant absolute metric tons of labor because it was a sort of I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine system, which is the way to run it, right? If you're going to do it. But ultimately what that meant was if you had a song that you spent 40, 50 hours authoring, taking the different tracks from the artist's original thing, getting each instrument laid out the way you want, authoring for easy, medium, hard, and expert. Yeah. Doing using MIDI to author the camera moves and the lighting. It was a really interesting, cool system. Yeah. And I tried to optimize a lot. It was all MIDI tracks. Very cool. If you did all the work to do that, then you upload it to the system, and then you wait some amount of time, weeks, maybe months, for enough people to play it. There was a system of like points, and I don't remember it exactly how it worked.
Kind of like Greenlight for Steam used to be.
A little bit. And the thing is nobody would play anything you had done unless you had a reputation for playing other people's things and providing feedback and giving the thumbs up or thumbs down.
Like for like.
Sort of pretty much, yeah. And ultimately, that was the way to do it. Yeah. It made a lot of sense. But the problem was it was just totally impractical because here's how the distribution of profits went. You sell a song for $1 because songs on Rock Band generally were $2. Okay. But songs from the Rock Band network, which were not approved by Harmonix, customers were like, I'll pay $1 for that. Thank you. Sure. So for $1, 70% went to Microsoft and Harmonix. 30% went to you.
Whoa.
And this was part of the XNA model. Yeah. Ultimately, they couldn't, it was excuses, but there was just nothing you could do about that. Yeah. So you got 30%. And then you had to split that with whoever it is you were making deals with if it was not your music.
Yeah.
Because there were a couple of bands who were also tech savvy enough to do it. But for the most part, most of the people authoring tracks were working with other musicians to get their music into the game.
Yeah.
And so, but for a while, it was a really, really tight-knit community because we all had to be friends. We just had to be.
Yeah.
And one of sort of the proudest moments of that work in those days was that we had all sort of come up with an idea. We were percolating in the forums of like, wouldn't it be cool if we did like a track that was a bunch of the tracks all put together in like a 6-minute thing? And then we would put that up and then it would be like a sample.
Yeah.
And then people could try it out. And so I became really involved in that process and pitching that to Harmonix directly.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening is that instead of us doing that and putting it on the Rock Band Network, we did it and gave it to Harmonix and they released it on the store for free.
Oh.
So it was part of the regular store. And it contained samples of a lot of our work.
Yeah.
And I did a DJ voiceover for it.
Oh.
So it was as if I was... it would be like 15 seconds of a song, and then it would be 15 seconds of another song, and then I would come in like a DJ saying like that was this one, and before that it was this. Coming up next is this, and it was a super fun concept, and it was really fun to write and record and it was this great community effort. And then like none of us really saw increased sales from it. Like it was just the whole thing was a ton of work, and that's why I sort of describe it as a failure because there was so much that was right about it, but institutionally there was a lot that just couldn't work.
Sure.
And eventually the fewer and fewer people did it. It was more a case, it became more about promotion. So a band would have an album that they were releasing. So they're trying to promote that. And so they would tend to just pay people to do it because they knew they wouldn't make a lot of money on the sales from it.
Yeah.
And so the model sort of changed and it became less of the utopian ideal.
Yeah.
It was only available on Xbox because they had the infrastructure for it. And so it was a frustrating process, but it was kind of a magic time.
Yeah.
In a way.
It kind of sounds like with the theme, a lot of these games is that like they were almost destined to fail, even though they were doing really cool things.
Yes. And I think that's a big part of the theme is like the ideas and the intentions were too good to not go forward with.
Yeah.
But ultimately there wasn't enough in place to make it work.
Sure.
And I think that like that's a mistake we've all made.
Yeah.
Oh, right?
Yeah. It might have been like, it kind of sounds like some of the stuff was just ahead of its time. Like,
yeah.
I think it just came out too early. I mean, like a lot of people say that about the Dreamcast too, the Sega Dreamcast, in that like it had a lot of cool things about it, but like it just came out a little early and it wasn't.
Well, that one's more a result of Sega's institutional mismanagement.
There's that too, but
and that's the thing is that the definitions of these things are really up to you.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of these are examples of things I interact with. So like I feel personally about these things.
Yeah.
When people talk about how dumb it was that Ouya was around and how dare anybody believe in it, like I feel personally attacked, right?
Sure.
And like that is obviously just very emotional. But like I think everyone who is involved with these kinds of things, there are people who it mattered to.
Yeah.
And it's all part of the grand history of gaming. So I think it's worth just sort of taking everything at least on its own terms and seeing if it has some value, at least to learn and know about.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Reminds me of that Picard quote. It's like, you can do everything right and still lose.
Yep. Well, that's a great note to go out on.
That's our show. If you haven't already, subscribe to Nice Games Club in your favorite podcast app and be sure to give it a good review if you liked it or are nice like us. We really do need to know you're out there, so leave a review and tell all your friends too. We also want to hear directly from you, so follow us on Twitter at Nice Games Club, where Dale posts a whole lot of cool stuff. It's like amazing how well she's doing.
Yes. Thank you, Dale.
It's super fun.
In the old days, if you wanted to get in touch with us, you would tweet us and none of us would do anything about it.
Yes. Dale's handling it well.
Now you can tweet us and it gets to the right people because Dale is handling it.
Yes. You can also email us at contact@nicegames.club. Lastly, you can find out more about the show and your nice host, as well as get all of the links and show notes from this and other episodes at nicegames.club.
So until we start again, remember to
play nice
and make nice.